I'd like to kind of reflect on yesterday's meeting with industry. It was a full session, a whole range of speakers, some of whom you will hear from today as well. And there was a couple of points that I kind of picked up on yesterday. The first was around the opportunities that exist for district heating, for D2 grids, and for the just transition. And we talked about lowering temperature and increasing efficiency. It's been a point. The opportunities for growth that existed in the supply chain and in skills, and the real benefits that could be delivered at a society level, but also at a consumer level as well. But we noted that there was a range of challenges as well. How we get heat network ready, how we deal with that massive challenge of retrofit. For projects like ours, like D2 grids that rely upon heat pumps and heat pump technology, the grid capacity and constraints associated with that, particularly when we bring in things like electric vehicles and the impact that will have. But also how we incentivise the supply chain, the supply side, and how we also incentivise the demand side as well. So some really big points around that. And yesterday after Doreen's presentation, and later on when we did the Q&A, I kind of unfairly asked the question, are we policy rich and action poor? And that was a kind of challenge point because, you know, if we are in a climate emergency, if we recognise that, do we need to move much quicker with policy, be much more adaptable with policy and get it rolled out? But it's an unfair question because good policy helps everybody. It makes us allows us to make the right decisions for the long term, for wider society benefit. And that kind of underpins the kind of just transition. So I'm really interested today to hear what will be said on policy and to maybe understand, like we did with the industry, what the challenges and opportunities are. When we finally summarised yesterday, there was 3 kind of points that resonated with me around the wider challenges and how we address these. And we talked about, firstly, having a holistic perspective, being flexible and adaptable, and then thirdly, and the one that kind of struck with me most, having the determination that's needed. And I think for most of us that have been involved in these projects, they take years to bring to fruition. They bring countless challenges, and it's remarkable the tenacity that people have to get over that. And hopefully we'll see that today as well with the policy. So we have a range of speakers today. I'll kind of introduce the speakers as we go. And I'll also try and keep everybody on time because we've got quite a packed agenda and a couple of big presentations as well. So I'll be sitting in the corner and I'll prompt anybody if you're kind of running over as well. I've got a couple of hours to kind of get through this morning. We'll then have a break for coffee, a bit of cake hopefully if you're interested in that, and then we have a session with a poster, a kind of breakout session, and then back here for Q&A and an interactive session before we have lunch. We do have a tour planned for today to see the BGS facility and also the wonderful Hope sculpture, which is up in the top end of the park. However, some of you were on that tour yesterday and it's kind of weather dependent. I won't be offended if people take the opportunity to keep dry and go somewhere else. So hopefully that's okay for everybody. I'd like to then just say a few words about Clyde Gateway and about our Green Regeneration and Innovation District. First of all, I'd like to say that we are a partnership between South Lanarkshire Council, Glasgow City Council, Scottish Enterprise, are the 3 owners of the company, and we're supported by the Scottish Government. And it's important that we note that we've had LCITP funding from the Scottish Government, and that's been critical in bringing our projects forward. We are a charity with a trading subsidiary, and that trading subsidiary allows us to gift aid back up to the charity and pursue our wider aims as a regeneration company, which in summary is about people, place and jobs. And I've talked about partnership at the high level there, but we work with a whole range of partners in delivering our projects. And I wanted to mention today SSE and the Sustainability Development Fund that is contributing directly to the D2 Grids project, and particularly the work that we are doing in solar PV, battery storage and so forth. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later as we progress through. I think most of you know the Clyde Gateway area, so I'm not going to focus too greatly in on that, but maybe just to pick up the train lines, Bridgeton, Darmarlock and Rutherglen, running through the core elements of our community, the River Clyde running through the middle of the area, Broadly, that's the split between South Lanarkshire and Glasgow, and you'll see Celtic Park at the top, and if you're going to the football tonight, Hampden Park is down at the bottom. So we cover around 2,000 acres, around 840 hectares, and when we picked that boundary, we were in the lowest or the top 5% for deprivation, but now that we've moved over a decade or more of regeneration, we've managed to turn around a number of those indicators within the Clyde Gateway area. In terms of our transition, we talk about an integrated infrastructure approach, and that's not just hard infrastructure, it's soft infrastructure as well. If we're going to tackle climate change, and if we're going to tackle the journey to net zero, and if we're going to make sure that communities like Clyde Gateway and others across the country are not left behind, then we need to do that in an integrated way. It's not just about district heating, and it's not just about building energy performance, it's about a whole range of other factors. So we have a 9-point plan that goes from the remediation of brownfield land as a starting point, through flood management, a critical point in dealing with change, then surface water management, about how we develop in a sustainable way, moving through green space and biodiversity, requiring that to be built in as part of our development plans, looking at the reuse and renewal of existing assets as a critical component of being resource and resource efficient, before you then get into building energy performance. Now, we're a company that advocates district heating networks. It's a core element of D2 grids, and it's a core element of the projects that we're delivering. But we realise that it's not the only solution, and that Fabric First will also be a core part of that as well. Then we're into district heating and cooling, and that recognises that there are huge challenges associated with district heating and cooling, but they can deliver long-term benefits. Sustainable transport then, again, how we move people. Electric vehicles are part of the answer, but they won't solve everything. And we need to make sure that we're investing into sustainable transport across walking, cycling and all modes as well. So kudos to anybody who cycled here today, even more so in the rain. We've got a key cycle route just outside on the river that takes into the city centre, and it's really well used. And then finally, developing skills and jobs. If we're going to make that just transition, then developing skills and jobs needs to be part of that. We recognised yesterday the potential from that skills gap, that actually skills gap can give us an opportunity for growth as well. So within our Green Regeneration Innovation District, we have some core projects. The BGS Glasgow Observatory, we'll hear a little bit more about that this morning. It's a project we're very proud to host here in Clyde Gateway. Our community energy project in Damarnock in partnership with Scottish Water Horizons, which is now live. D2 grids and our 5G DHC, the focus of today's session. And then sitting alongside our green space and biodiversity projects in Cunningar Loop and Mollsmire Park, which opens on Saturday if you're interested in that. And then Damarnock Riverside Park, which is currently on site. And then our sustainable transport projects, we've been investing in transport for over a decade now. I can bore you with some of those interventions that we've made, but it includes active travel, key routes and spaces and bus infrastructure as part of that. And then finally our skills development, which is sat alongside all of the work that we have undertaken. Just to give you the geography then, that's Cunningar Loop where we are today, and this is the Shawfield and the Damarnock locations. And I will just zoom in a little bit further to that. So this is the focus. We're over here, BGS. On the Damarnock side of the river, that is our high temperature network, served from the energy centre operated by Scottish Water Horizons. And then crossing over the Smart Bridge, that is where we will source from the energy centre from the wastewater treatment works for D2 grids, pass over the Smart Bridge and then service the Magenta site. So operating a high temperature network and a low temperature network within an integrated system. I'm just going to finish on a few slides of those points that I talked around, the remediation of brownfield land, how we've managed flood management, our surface water management, green space and biodiversity, reuse and renewal, Eastworks on site, absolutely fantastic building energy performance. This is Rutherglen Links, probably still one of the best performing Fabric First offices in Scotland. And then through district heating and cooling, sustainable transport, and then finally on to developing skills and jobs. So thank you very much for listening about Clyde Gateway. I'll welcome you once again to today's session. And without further ado, we'll come on to the first speaker. So I'm delighted to welcome Eugenie. who is a thematic expert from the Open University. They are one of the partners in our D2 Grids project and one of the leads, technical leads within the work streams that we are delivering. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Like Martin said, my name is Eugenia. I'm a thematic expert in the project D2 Grids. I work for Open University that's based in the Netherlands. It's a university in the Netherlands that's a partner of the project D2 Grids, along with Clyde Gateway, Scottish Water Horizons, and other European partners. My presentation today will give a little bit of context into the European setting in which the project D2 Grids is happening and which Clyde Gateway is involved in. So D2 Grids is an Interreg Northwest Europe funded project. Interreg Northwest Europe aims at making the area of Northwest Europe a key economic player with focus in innovation, sustainability, and cohesion across Europe. It has 3 priority topics, which are innovation, low carbon, resource and material efficiency. The project D2 Grids actually falls into the low carbon priority. Like I said, this is the project. It has a budget, it's financed at 14.4 million euros from the Interreg funding, and the total budget of the project amounts to 24 million. The project is expected to finish already next year in 2023. And we have a lot of international partners across Northwest Europe. Open University, from which I come from, and Clyde Gateway, Scottish Water Horizons are our Scottish partners, but we also have partners all across Northwest Europe, including all kinds of partners, which are go from consultancies to universities, and energy, companies like ENGIE and Asper, very diverse project partners. And the lead partner of this project is Mindwater, who was the first developer of the concept 5th generation district heating and cooling in the Netherlands. Why we're doing this project and why also it falls under the low carbon category in Interreg is because roughly 50% of the European Union's total energy consumption goes to heating and cooling buildings and industry, but only less than 20% of that comes from renewable sources. The objective of D2 Grids is to roll out and scale up the use of 5th generation district heating and cooling, which is an alternative for low carbon heating and cooling. A little bit about 5th generation district heating and cooling, if you're not familiar with it. It's a new concept introduced, like I mentioned, by Mindwater in the Netherlands, where the first demonstration site is. It's the main feature of 5th generation is that it's not only about using more of the traditional renewable energy sources, but using the already existing waste heat and waste cold, and it's based on exchanging that energy so that there is no waste in the network. In an ideal situation, there's a complete circular energy flow, and of course that is not always possible, but the idea with 5th generation is that any additional energy that is needed to supply the system comes from renewable sources or waste heat, like I mentioned. You can picture this exchange with the example of a supermarket that has freezers and fridges for generating the cold. You have excess heat, and you use the excess heat to supply that to the dwellings in the area. This is what I mentioned earlier, the Mindwater in Heerlen demonstration site. This was the first ever 5th generation district heating and cooling example. It's fully operational in the Netherlands, in the south of the Netherlands, very close to where actually one of our pilot sites is. And this is what I mentioned before with the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The example in Herlen has 2.7 times less carbon emissions than traditional gas heating. And that's the objective of the 2 grids, to roll out this lower carbon heating and cooling solution. We have concrete targets within the project to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also additional renewable energy capacities. This is the overall project targets, but each pilot also has their own individual targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adding renewable energy capacity. So within the project, we try to define what is 5th generation district heating and cooling and how it is different from other district heating previous generations. We came up with 5 principles that define this, which are closing the energy loop, like I mentioned before, a complete exchange of energy where there is no waste, using low-graded sources for low-graded demand, improving the energy efficiency, and decentralized and demand-driven energy supply, again, making optimal energy efficient supply. An integrated approach of energy flows to avoid energy waste, again, across sector and reduce the peak loads, with which is also, a main feature of 5th generation. And using local sources as a priority, stimulating also the local economy. In the project, we have 5 pilot sites. One of them is what Martin mentioned earlier here in Glasgow. We also have a pilot site in Bronsum, the Netherlands, very close to where the original demo site is. Bochum in Germany, Plymouth in the UK, Paris-Saclay in France, and Glasgow. So I'm going to give a quick overview of this pilot. So the first one in Bronsum is in the south of the Netherlands. Like you can see, it's already operational. It's led by, coordinated by Mindwater, who is also the lead partner of the project and the one that came up with this 5th generation solution. We have also a pilot site in Bochum, in Germany. It's currently an industrial area. The rural area in Germany is very industrial, and there's also many abandoned mines because it used to be a mining area, which is now not anymore. So it has also a lot of potential for 5th generation. Then we have the pilot site in Paris-Saclay. Paris-Saclay is a campus area a little bit outside in the outskirts of Paris. We visited recently. It's a really large area where there is not only a university but also housing associations where students live. There's also shops and cafes and restaurants, and there is a hospital being built at the moment. So it will be a quite large area, all supplied with 5th generation district heating and cooling. They have a geothermal well that went into operation very recently, and that's for Paris. We also have a pilot in Plymouth, Plymouth City Council recently joined the project with their objective to be climate neutral by 2030, ahead of the agenda of 2050. This is one of the projects in which they are aiming to lower their carbon emissions. And they are hoping, or the city center of Plymouth actually has the potential to be supplied by 5th generation district heating and cooling. And finally, we have the pilot in Glasgow, which Martin already mentioned, so I won't go into more detail into that. And not only we have the pilot sites, but within the project, like I said before, the objective is to roll out and scale up this concept of 5th generation. So we also identified 5 follower regions within Northwest Europe, in which we hope to, even after the project, that the 5th generation has a potential to be implemented. Those areas are the northeast of France, the rural area in Germany, Scotland, the whole area of Scotland in the UK, and Parkstad Limburg in the Netherlands, which is where the pilot site is, Flanders in Belgium, and Luxembourg, and East Midlands in the UK. So the project, in order to expand 5th generation district heating in these follower regions, is doing a regional analysis in which basically you can see here the example from our partners at BRGM. They looked into different characteristics of the region, the current heating regimes and cooling regimes, the policies in place at the moment, and seeing the potential for 5th generation district heating. They identified several areas which are highlighted in this case in orange. And here is, for example, the case of Luxembourg. Our partners also identified potential areas, and finally, after the regional analysis, they came to the conclusion that the two in red had the biggest potential for rolling out 5th generation. So the next step after this analysis is to actually develop more concrete local action plans in the areas identified for this potential. The local action plans they involve financial and implementation planning, but also a lot of interactions with stakeholders in order to pitch this solution and to see the potential and how this 5th generation district heating and cooling could be rolled out in those areas. Some of these areas identified are developing a very, very concrete action plans, which is, for example, the case in Flanders. In the Thor Park, one of our partners, Vito, is doing this local action plan in actually the area where they work, which is Energyville in Genk. And yeah, this is hoped to actually start operating with 5th generation district heating and cooling soon. And that's it. The objective of this regional analysis and local action plans is to roll out 5th generation district heating across Europe, which is the main objective of the two grids. And that's everything from my side. I think there will be a Q&A later, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to just reach out to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess that presentation underlined when we were looking at the amount of renewable resources, around 19% was the figure there. Then we had the example of Herlenen in the Netherlands and how far that potentially has come up with 5G HVDC. And then that kind of underlines the potential that we have here in order to be able to scale up this technology. It's interesting for us working with all of the pilots across the European partners and seeing the different scale challenges and opportunities, but of course there are common themes that run through all of us. So we will have the Q&A later on. We also have an interactive Q&A that you'll be able to do online, so I'll make sure everybody has Wi-Fi access for that. So if you keep your questions to later, that would be fantastic. And now I would like to welcome up Andres from the British Geological Survey. As we mentioned earlier, we have the BGS test site here in Cunningar Loop. It's looking at the potential for mine water, and something that we feel is of particular relevance to Clyde Gateway, something we're very excited about in terms of the potential for across Scotland. So thank you.
Right, thanks very much. Okay. So yeah, my name is Andres González Quiroz. I'm from the British Geological Survey. I'm a hydrogeologist, so I'm kind of outsider here, I think. But I'll try to convince you or show you the potential of geothermal energy here in the UK, and especially the mine water because of the observatory we have here in the Cunningar Loop. So this is some numbers for sure you already know about the need to transfer or to turn the heating in the UK into some from renewable sources, transfer these natural gas boilers into another form of energy. So we need to convert at least, there is an estimation of 20,000 homes a week to low carbon heating. So we need decarbonization of heat, and we know that this is challenging, and especially now this is even more urgent because of the war in Ukraine, and we need to meet these net zero targets. So we need to collaborate and to find the resources. And one of these resources we have here is geothermal energy. Geothermal energy is the energy stored in the form of heat beneath the surface of the solid earth. So for sure, you've been, I don't know, in a cave or in a mine, and you are in a very cold day, and you go into the cave, you feel that it's a different temperature. Or even, I'm from Spain, so when I'm in a very hot day and I go into the cave, and you feel that it's kind of cool. So we have some kind of constant temperature underground, and if we go deeper into the ground, into the earth, this temperature is increased. So we can get or use this warmer temperature as our energy source. And we have this potential that this is constantly replenished, is renewable, and is stable. And we can use using multiple technologies at different scales for different users. So we can use it from greenhouses to district heating to heat and power using very hot, deep resources. So I have here a kind of classification, is an informal classification, is between shallow and deep. The shallow geothermal energy is in the upper, say, 500 meters. We use heat pumps, and one of the resources that I'll speak later is mine water, because this is the resource we have here under our feet. And for this resource, we can use these fifth generation heat networks. One of the examples is the mine water in Herling. And then we have the deep geothermal. Deep geothermal is much deeper, much hotter. We can directly use this very hot water, could be 80, 100, 200 degrees Celsius. We are not in Iceland, that they use very, very hot water. Here the temperatures are slightly lower, but still we can use for power generation. For example, in Cornwall, there are some projects that are already ready to produce power. And something very important, I think, is that when looking at this diagram, note that the scale is not linear. So sometimes it's very near us, but it's 5,000 meters there, for example, this deep geothermal system. So sometimes that there's this feeling that can be some seismic problems and these kind of things that they're important to have the scale on mind to think about the different resources and the different types of or technologies of energy. So the shallow geothermal energy is in the upper meters, and we have mainly 3 different types here. We have the ground source heat pump, or we can have a borehole, heat exchangers, or an open loop. In an open loop, we extract water from an aquifer, and we can return the water into the aquifer again. This water is usually around 10-20 degrees Celsius, depending on the region and the location of this aquifer. From borehole heat exchanger, the transfer is inside a closed pipe, so we extract the heat from the ground. And at the right, we have the mine water resources. The mine water resources are what we have here under our feet in the Conga Loop. And these are very important because if you look at the map at your right, you see that coal mines are under many important cities in the UK. And this happens all across many regions in Europe. I'm from the north of Spain. I'm from a coal mining region, and there are already 2 district heating developments there using mine water from 2 very large mines. So this is, I think, really important. And the potential in mine water systems is we have mines that have been closed. The mines here in Glasgow, for example, 100 years ago, and these mines have been flooded with water, and we can extract this water to use for heating. I'll speak more about this later. And in the deep geothermal, we have 3 main types of resources here in the UK. We have the deep hot sedimentary aquifers. These are around 2,000, 3,000 meters depth. These are like the shallow aquifers I spoke before. We have to extract the water, pumping the water from using boreholes. But the water in these deep sedimentary aquifers are much warmer. It's around 60, 80 degrees Celsius. So it can be used for directly use in many applications. One example here is a Southampton district heating scheme that was active for a couple of decades. And then we have the granites we have some potential here in Scotland in the Aberdeenshire area. For this we have to drill very deep boreholes, and we have to find some kind of fracture areas where water can flow, and we can produce water at very high temperatures, say 120, 140 degrees Celsius. And there are a couple of projects in Cornwall. One is the United Downs project, and it's two boreholes. One is 5,000 meters depth, and they are ready for power production. And there is another project that is almost ready for production. That is the Eden project. If you know the Eden gardens or area in Cornwall, it is nearby. So there is some potential, and mainly in these three regions. So it is here in Scotland, Cornwall, and then in the north of England of granites for deep and medium or high geothermal energy. And of course, I'll speak about this later more, but there are a lot of uncertainties, a lot of barriers, a lot of challenges. So this is something we need to study and we need to understand better, and this is our main task in the British Geological Survey. So these are some of the, it's been moved a little, the presentation, I'm sorry. But, okay, the thing is, we know there is potential for geothermal energy in the UK. We know there are very good resources, a variety of resources near major cities or major urban areas. And we know the technologies have been proved satisfactorily in other countries. We have the example of Netherlands, we know about Germany, Iceland, for example. So we know this can work, and we know there is potential. But there are multiple challenges and barriers for development here in the UK. And these are from regulation, but who owns the resource? The licensing is, we need groundwater licensing if we are extracting water, if we are pumping water for heating, or we have to go to the Oil and Gas Authority. So it's different licensing. The limits, how much water we can extract. If there are limits in the water we can extract, there are limits in the energy we can produce. And the interferences of multiple users is something that is very important, because if we have a large mine flooded and we have many users in the same mine, there could be interferences if we are extracting the water and then injecting the water again that is cooler into the same mine. We can be interfering another user that is nearby. So we need regulation, we need to understand better how the water and the heat moves in this system. Of course, we have the technical, and this is very important, the observatory we have here. We need to characterize better the resource. We need to monitor and predict how this changes over time and over space. And something that is really, really important is the drilling, because there is a lot of uncertainty about drilling. We are talking about mines that have been closed for more than 100 years, so we need to drill a borehole into this mine to extract the water, but maybe we are drilling in a wrong location, so we need to be certain, understanding better the mine plans, understanding better the geology, where is the best place for this drilling. And there are other, of course, the environmental challenges that need to be better understood. The impacts on water resources, for example, here the communication or the exchange with the river, for example, with the shallow water resources, with water resources that are used for public consumption, the pollution of these resources when we are producing heating or using the infrastructure. So there are many, many challenges and barriers that we need to understand better. And of course, we need to collect data for evidence-based regulation and policy, and to understand better and to inform better the public and stakeholders about the potential of the resource, and to develop geothermal energy here in the UK. So the UK Geos project, the Geoenergy Observatories, is a £31 million project here in the UK. There are 3 observatories to understand better 3 different technologies of geothermal energy. One is here in Glasgow, is right here under our feet, and is for mine water energy and heat storage. There is another one in Cheshire for deep hot sedimentary aquifers. So there is a deeper boreholes drilled in the ground to understand better how water and heat moves in these deep aquifers. And then there is a shallow urban observatory in Cardiff to try to understand better the open loop and closed loop ground source heat pumps in a crowded area in Glasgow, and the different interferences and different users in this urban area. So I'll speak a bit about the UKGEOS Glasgow. So it's here in the Cunningham Loop. If you look at the picture there, we are next to the site 2. So it's 11 boreholes in total here in the loop. There are 3 boreholes that are drilled in the upper coal mining, upper coal mine level. That is about 50 meters depth. There are another 3 boreholes that are drilled in the main Glasgow, the mine level. That is about 80-90 meters depth. And then we have another set of 5 boreholes that are drilled at different depths into shallow superficial deposits, and to understand better the influence when we pump water from the mine levels in the upper aquifer, in the shallow deposits, and also in the river, for example. So we are doing monitoring and sampling both from the groundwater and the river water, and we are trying to understand how this system behaves in a demonstration scale, and to learn about how this works to then scale up into a real production mine water scheme. So we have a heat pump, a chiller, and a heat center that's already been installed, and there will be 2 abstraction boreholes and 2 injection boreholes, so we can set different schemes of pumping and injection from the main to the upper, or both in the upper, or different configurations, to understand better how this communicates and how this changes over time. So I think this is a really good place and we want for different users to come here and to use the observatory to understand better how mine water could be a energy resource here in the UK. So we are working with universities and with industry to try to put this to work in this observatory and to learn more about the mine water energy. So some key messages. We know that the geothermal energy is a low carbon energy resource that is available across the UK, and we know that these resources are enough to provide heating for more than 15 million homes for several centuries. But the technology is not widely used in the UK. We need development, and there are many challenges and barriers that limit the widespread use. So we need to develop this market, and with appropriate support and investment, geothermal energy could make a considerable contribution to the decarbonization of heat in the UK. And we believe that this research infrastructure will provide evidence-based information for regulation and policy. And that's all I think we have. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was interesting there in terms of the numbers, that 80% of UK households on natural gas, so almost that reverse of the 19% renewables that we'd heard in the earlier session. Now, just because I'm nosy, I'd like to get a kind of show of hands in the room. So see who in the room has moved off of natural gas. Is there anybody here that's actually moved on to an air source heat pump, or so any air source heat pumps? Oh, back. Nice. That's where we go. That's fine. None of the policy makers, of course, but I think it underlines the kind of challenge about how we actually, as an individual, how you kind of transition across in your own net zero journey, and the challenges that are associated with that. So a few things from the presentation. Again, it kind of struck me the constant supply and independent of weather, and being able to kind of remove some of the uncertainties that can be associated with other renewable resources is certainly a key point for us. We talked about regulation and economic barriers, and I guess that goes to the heart of the policy kind of agenda, and in particular in some of the key lessons there at the end where we talked about support and investment. And I know we've got colleagues from Scottish Enterprise and other agencies within the room today, but I think for all of us that have one foot in the public sector and one foot in the commercial sector, but how we actually address that support and investment, I guess, is a kind of critical point. That leads us very nicely into the next presentation from Doreen Reid from Scottish Enterprise, which will talk about Scotland's opportunity to be a leader in the 5G DHC. We'll also take us through some of the outputs of some of the recent reports as well, and I'm sure it will give us some food for thought as we go through the day. Thank you.
Right, good morning everybody, and thanks to the team at Clyde Gateway and D2 Grids for the invitation to come and speak to you today. As Martin said, my name is Doreen Reid and I'm with the low carbon heat team within Scottish Enterprise. If you're wondering why our slides are co-branded, I was supposed to be joined by Ruth Bush from Ramble. She sends her apologies. I know some of you know Ruth, so she did really want to be here, but got a nasty bug, so we'd be quite glad that she's not here, actually. So yes, this is a photo of Queen's Quay, and the eagle-eyed among you will know that that's a 4G heat network. Took a group of my colleagues there recently to have a look at that and find out how things were going, and great to hear the ambition about the increasing number of buildings that were going to be connected. And of course in the future I'm very much looking forward to be out and about doing presentations with pictures of the 5G network here at Clyde Gateway. Now, Scottish Enterprise commissioned Ramble to undertake a study analysing the potential for Scotland to be a leader in fifth generation heating and cooling networks. That report was completed at the end of November. Today I'm going to provide a snapshot of the report. It runs to about 30 pages. It's an absolute page turner though, so I recommend you do read it, and I'll provide a link to that in the slides. Just a quick run through of what I'm going to touch on today. As I say, we've kind of pulled out what we thought would be the most relevant parts of the report for today's talk. So why the study? Well, both 4G and 5G heat networks are going to play a key role in decarbonising Scotland's heating systems. And to drive that transformational change, we obviously have some very ambitious targets that were set by the Scottish Government. We have a developing regulatory framework, including the Heat Network Bill, and we also have funding mechanisms such as the Heat Network Delivery Fund, which is fantastic to see. Scottish Enterprise role is to translate that transformational change into economic benefit for Scotland, and as a result we wanted to commission a study to help us understand the potential of 5G for Scotland. We wanted to understand the current state of play in Europe and establish, is there an opportunity for Scotland to become a leader in what is an emerging area, and if so, what further activity might be required to deliver that ambition. This is actually comes from another report that we've just completed. That was a report looking at heat pumps and heat networks and the kind of value of the components. But we did, as part of that report, I was again working with Ramble, asked them to do a bit of market sizing. So they based that on the targets that you can see there, 2.6 terawatt hours by 2027 and 6 terawatt hours by 2030. And they concluded that between now and 2030, there was a cumulative expenditure of 5.2 billion. So as you can see, it's a sizable prize to play for. So fifth generation district heating, basically it's continuing a trend, efficiency up, temperatures down. But the difference is, I guess, then there's a bit of a break from the traditional configuration of what a heat network looks like. For the purposes of this report, 4G heat networks were described as centralised networks, lower temperatures incorporating renewable energy. Fifth generation are decentralised networks, so for example heat pumps at each building. They are bidirectional, ambient temperature, and they supply both heating and cooling demands. This is the research structure in the report. I'm not going to dwell on that. As I say, you can delve more deeply into that yourselves. Now, when we started off to do the research, I think we thought there would be more kind of published articles on 5G heating and cooling. There wasn't as much as we thought, so we were very reliant on doing interviews with both experts within Ramboll, within other organisations, and not just in Scotland, but importantly across the wider UK and across Europe as well. So if that's any of you, I say thank you very much, because we do really rely on you guys for this kind of information. So now I'm switching notes, so you have to bear with me. This is Ruth's part of the presentation, but I'm sure it will be good. And this slide you'll recognise, Eugenia showed something very, very similar. So it's kind of one of the, I guess, the nub of what we wanted to get to with this report is what locations in Scotland where could we be developing 5G heating and cooling networks? So what does the ideal network look like? So as you can see there, and as Eugenia mentioned, want to have ideally heating and cooling, have thermal storage, utilise waste heat, and be powered by renewable electricity, which in Scotland is not a problem because we are sitting well over 90%, I think 95% renewable electricity at the moment. However, the reality is getting the stars to align, as those of us know, Helen's nodding there from Scottish Water Horizons, knows all about it, is quite challenging. But the good thing about these type of heat networks is that they're very flexible. So you don't actually need all of these, but as long as you've got some of those, then it's still going to be a viable network. And the good news is that we do have these things available in Scotland. Happened there. So advantages and disadvantages. So under the advantages, the fact that the uninsulated pipe network required is very similar to what we use for gas and water mains. So existing gas installers with minimal training could transition to working for heat networks. Flexibility, fifth generation heat networks allows you to deliver different temperatures into buildings. So that means that you're not dependent on having to service the building that needs the highest temperature. Everybody's not slave to that one requirement, if you like. Use of existing sources, and we've heard from Andreas about the flooded mines and the potentials. At the moment, these mines, these are a liability. The Coal Authority is spending millions of pounds on remediation, and and there's so much history obviously behind them. What a fantastic story! Our coal mines that used to heat our homes and our industry can be repurposed and used again. But there is a little bit of research that needs to be done, so it's fantastic to see the UK GEOS site here, and the weather's clearing up, so hopefully we'll all get out for a tour later. Also, wastewater treatment works, and Scottish Water Horizon have shown a huge amount of leadership in terms of being willing to collaborate, because these organisations are having to think out of the box, they're having to get more creative and be willing to do that. So we're seeing more and more of that. And of course the advantages of mines and wastewater treatment plants is, where are they? They're close to our centres of population, so it lends itself really well to these type of high density networks. A few disadvantages though. It's never a perfect world, is it? So the finances stack up much better for 5G when there's a cooling demand as well. In Scotland, as some of you may have noticed, we don't have, we're not Spain, we don't have such hot weather, but there are areas in Scotland where there is a cooling demand. As part of the study, we did also think about the data for, unfortunately, the impact of climate change and the fact that temperatures are going to rise. But we didn't think we had reliable data to be able to make any firm conclusions. But I guess one of our thoughts were that temperatures are going to rise, so there will be an increasing need for cooling capacity as well. Pipe work, the pipes are slightly bigger, but when you take into consideration that the pre-insulated pipes, because of the insulation part of them, once you put that on, there's not so much of a difference. And as I've said, this pipe work is more flexible. Electrical infrastructure upgrades, you'll need perhaps to do electrical upgrades at an individual building level, and there's a lower understanding of people of what 4G than 4GDH. So people don't know as much about 5th generation heating and cooling. So when people are thinking about, local authorities are thinking about, I'm going to put a heat network there, they're not necessarily thinking about the different options that are available to them. Okay, in terms of a supply chain, we've got some amazing companies. I do love talking about our Scottish companies, such as Sunamp with their kind of game-changing, phase-changing materials, offering thermal storage solutions. The pipework, as we mentioned, is the same as used in utilities. And then plenty of trenching capabilities. And I live in Edinburgh, and oh my God, they certainly get plenty of practice at digging up the streets. That's all I'm going to say about that. So anybody who knows of anybody that's kind of got any innovation around making trenching less disruptive, then I think you're definitely onto a winner there. In terms of what we might be lacking, we're very fortunate that we do have two major heat pump manufacturers in Scotland. We've got Mitsubishi, massive international company, and Star Renewables, local homegrown company. But they're not necessarily manufacturing heat pumps that are the right size for this type of network. That doesn't mean to say that they couldn't do that in the future. We don't have any uninsulated pipe manufacturers. Every time we do these reports, whether it's pre-insulated pipes or uninsulated pipes, the same thing comes up. That's a definite gap in Scotland. Very common, the industry has raised their concerns about the lack of qualified ground source and water source heat pump installers. And then we don't have any large ambient thermal stores in Scotland, so we don't really have that kind of expertise or background either. So the potential to develop in Scotland, BEIS funding, that's the right card, BEIS funding basically concluded that 28% of total heat demand could be supplied by heat networks, and of course a chunk of that can come from 5th generation heating and cooling. And here are there basically some indicators of what you'd need for that. So a mixed building stock with different heat supply temperatures, as I mentioned, a balance of heating and cooling demands, and a kind of match of suitable demand with low temperature heat sources. So another good thing about 5th generation, as I said, it's flexible, therefore it can incorporate both high grade and low grade heat into the system without, certainly from a low grade heat perspective, without having to upgrade it. However, obviously high grade heat is better suited to 4th generation systems. However, if you've got intermittent heat, or say you have a big, a food manufacturer that does have waste heat but wants to use some of it for itself but has some leftover waste heat, that could then be included into a 5th generation heat network. So basically there's 400 gigawatt hours of low-grade heat available, and a portion of also of high-grade heat that could be used as well. However, that's only part of the story. That's a small part of the story. You know, we've talked about the great resource that we have there in our mines. Also the other types of resources we have there, rivers, etc. So I think key message probably for policymakers is don't decide too early what kind of heat network you're going to do. Consider the demands of the area, the quality of the heat sources, the timing and frequency of the availability, and the location in relation to your heat network. I'm just going to click through all of this. Yeah. So due to the fact that it is a very emerging market, Ramboll weren't able to use the normal metrics such as market share, revenue, investment when discussing what leadership looks like. I'll need to hurry up. So when we asked interviewees, they spoke about Heerlen because it was so complex and it is a very impressive project. So it was that complexity that they felt was the kind of leadership rather than having lots of smaller projects. So quickly, opportunities got the opportunities to develop more advanced pilot projects, the opportunities provided by LHEs to develop more heat networks and to include 5G heat networks. Challenges, it's a more complex, there's lots of different inputs, so we need to break the mold, we need to think differently and develop new business models, we need to think about the cooling demand. Recommendations, as I say, more advanced pilot projects, and D2 Grids is fantastic because all of these different projects that Eugenia mentioned, all those lessons learned can all be fed in so that we get better and better at doing this. Increase awareness throughout the value chain, addressing the lack of awareness, map and match resources and demand. This report was done in November. There's been lots of work done. There was a great report by Bureau Happold on sources of demand, and also in the Heat Network Action Plan there's language around increasing information on waste heat sources, and then, as I say, kind of addressing the business model. So there is an opportunity for Scotland to become a leader. It is a very emerging market. We do have capability, but there's other areas that we need to work on. More information on waste heat sources, but as I say, that's in hand. And the need for innovation in some areas, for example, business models. And also in the report, smart controls was mentioned as well, because of all these different inputs. Very complicated, so we need all the controls to be able to help manage that. Have I got time, Hugh? Yeah. Sorry. So very quickly, Scottish Enterprise Ambition. As I mentioned, we're an economic development agency. Our three core pillars are international innovation and investment, underpinned by fair work and net zero. You can see the kind of the range of activities that we do. Importantly, we have 7 priority areas, of which decarbonising heat is one. The role of my team is to get the whole of Scottish Enterprise pulling in the same direction and all supportive towards the decarbonising heat agenda. Some of the things that Scottish Enterprise are administrating is the heat source, which is a cluster builder. That's about connecting and building the ecosystem of all the different actors you need, the companies, academic, public support organisations. It was launched at All Energy, but there's a webinar on the 14th of June. Please sign up if you missed All Energy. The Low Carbon Manufacturing Fund is now open for applications, obviously not just applicable for low carbon heat, but obviously you can apply for that if eligible. And we're also preparing a programme of capital investment and heat innovation support, including SE-led calls and innovation challenges. We do have a supply chain directory. 367 companies are signed up. Please go and have a look. If you're not on and you think you should be on, you can scroll down to the bottom, find the link and request to be added. You do need to be doing activity in Scotland though. And then we have a number of reports, the one we spoke about today. We also have one by BRE on innovation and needs assessment, which did also look at heat networks and some interesting conclusions from that. And also geothermal supply chain analysis and global market opportunities. Obviously, our oil and gas capability in the north of Scotland lends itself very well to the geothermal opportunity. What you can do, we have a newsletter you can sign up to. Please go on, look at Heat Source, sign up for their events. There's going to be a lot of exciting things happening, so do get engaged. Check out our directory and come and speak to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was hugely impressive, Dory, not just doing one presentation but two, so thank you very much, and with us over the two days. A couple of things again that came out of that presentation for me. I think first of all, you always kind of look at the numbers, and there was a figure in there of £1,085 per megawatt hour. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Doreen, and ask you to kind of drill down into that a little bit, if you pardon the pun. But again, that's something I think in terms of that information that's available to industry and to decision makers, getting transparency and understanding of numbers is critical. So it's good to see that in the report. Mapping and demand analysis is another point that kind of came through from the report. And again, you know, as we're developing policy and as we're developing decision making, making sure that we get the decisions in the right locations is critically important. You know, and of course there are skills required in that mapping and demand analysis, and we've seen some of that earlier on in BGS's presentation, so it's good to see that highlighted. And then one for me that sits particularly is around that transition from gas and the existing skill sets. You know, if we're going to move at pace in terms of dealing with the climate emergency and so forth, then being able to understand those skills that can move quickly and adapt quickly is kind of important. What Donnie mentioned yesterday is that we were part of a group that went to Herlen in the Netherlands in the very early days, probably, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago now. 2016. Oh God, you know, I kind of forget those 2 years of COVID, don't you? Everything like seems to be really 2 years, but yeah. So we went to Herlen and you know, and seen firsthand how that was working and how we could easily translate that across to Scotland. And we also had a learning journey to Gothenburg, where we've seen heating and cooling at a district level and how that was managed as well. And that led us directly to considering the wastewater treatment works as a potential source for Clyde Gateway. So it underlines the importance of working in partnership and so forth. So with that, what I'd like to do is welcome Sarah Jane MacArthur, who's a partner with Brodie's, to come up and speak. Sarah Jane is involved in a whole range of district heating projects with a number of partners that we are working with, including Scottish Water Horizons and others, so has particular insight to the challenges. Thank you.
As we're at a policymakers workshop, I was asked just to set a little bit of the Scottish context for the policy environment. I've got 10 minutes, so it's going to be super high level. That's probably what you want to hear when you have the legal and policy bit. So I've got a slide with some key themes on it, which I'll try and pull out through the session. I'll go through sort of the most recent policy changes that we've had, policy developments, and then just a little bit of thinking at the end in terms of project delivery, but I know others are going to speak about what is being delivered at the moment. So in terms of the key themes, I think it is fair to say that the Scottish policy environment is supportive of heat networks. I think that would be the right assessment. And also that support is geared towards low carbon heat networks, and you've heard some of that already from Doreen. However, at the moment, there are no specific policy measures directed towards 5G networks. Now, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, because we're going to need a range of different types of heat networks, but certainly at the moment I can't see anything that's specifically supporting those types of networks. Of course, the regulatory framework for heat networks in Scotland is still very much in development. There's so much work to be done over the next couple of years, and so there is an opportunity right now to influence those really big policy decisions. So if there's something missing, now's the opportunity to say, we think it needs to say X, Y, or Z, and get that into government. So in terms of what we have in policy development recently, We now have in place the Heat Network Scotland Act. It is the first step towards regulating heat networks in Scotland, but unlike most other regulation, it's intended to enable increased deployment of heat networks. So it's supposed to be a positive step towards encouraging more heat networks. Within the Act, the definition of heat networks is very wide, and it would include low temperature heat networks such as fifth generation. Although the Act is a framework, within it, it does make clear that renewable sources of production in heat networks and the use of waste heat will be relevant considerations in terms of licensing and zoning of networks. So a push towards low carbon. As I've said, the Heat Networks Act is enabling legislation only. It's a framework. So lots of the detail is going to come in secondary legislation that is in development right now. So as I said, the opportunity to influence that policy remains. It could be as I'm going to sort of not look at Amy here, but I think 2024 before it's fully effective, perhaps earlier, but I think we're looking at a couple of years. The Act doesn't specifically mention fifth generation because the Act is technology agnostic, as I think it should be. I've also lost a year in the pandemic. I've spotted the error there. In March 2022, we've had the Heat Networks Delivery Plan. That was issued by Scottish Government as a requirement of the Heat Networks Act. It's very much a strategic document rather than a very detailed plan, and it focuses on the programme to roll out those regulations that I've talked about. It also covers the approach to buildings and how we're going to get information out of those buildings in order to facilitate the development and connection of heat networks. But it also focuses on much wider issues such as skills development, fuel poverty, and it also looks at capital programmes and funding. So it's not getting into the detail of how we're going to deliver specific networks in specific places. So there's no specific provision made there for fifth generation networks. There's even quite limited references to renewable heat networks within it. Although there was confirmation within that document that we've got a 90% non-domestic rates relief for heat networks using renewable heat generation, which is available until 31st March 2024. It's great, but it's not really, it's not that sort of long-term view of what subsidy support or revenue support might be available. At the moment, there's no obvious substitute for the RHI to support these really low-temperature renewable heat networks. And finally, the most recent element of policy development is that we've had the first national assessment of potential heat network zones, which was published in April this year. That assessment focused on district heat networks as defined in the Act, so nice broad focus. However, it was clear that the analysis was focused on fourth generation networks, not on fifth generation. And so while it was identified that some of the zones identified within that assessment may be suitable for fifth generation, there wasn't a look beyond those zones to see whether there were other areas that might be suitable for fifth generation networks. So, it was really positive that focused on the lower temperature 4G, but it didn't specifically look at 5G, so I think potentially a bit of a gap there. So what does that mean? What does that sort of policy context mean for 5G project delivery in Scotland? As I said right at the start, and I'll emphasise again, I think it is fair to say that the policy environment is generally supportive, but perhaps there's a lack of specific targeted support around these particular types of networks. There's plenty of grant funding support available, particularly for low carbon networks, but nothing really to replace the RHI yet. That might need some UK rather than Scottish government input. So I think it's still early days. I know we really need to get moving a bit quicker. So hopefully good news stories like we'll hear from Kevin about AMIDs and delivery at Clyde Gateway of the D2 GIDS project might increase confidence for developers and for customers to consider connecting and developing these 5G networks. That was all I was going to say. I'm happy to speak to people about detail and questions at the end or separately in case nobody else wants to know about it. That's all from me just now.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah Jane. That was wonderfully concise. There's a number of points I'm sure that will come from that over the course of the afternoon. Just give me a moment. So there's a couple of points from there. Replacing RHI and targeted support, and I guess those are two particular issues that those of us involved in developments or networks are particularly interested in. It's clear that if we want to scale up 5G DHC, then we're going to have to do that ahead of demand in many areas. And in order to deliver ahead of demand, then there has to be a recognition that there are some elements of support that's required. At Clyde Gateway, we're an organisation that's able to take risk and take on and have broad shoulders in that respect. And we've got a board that's very, very supportive of the work that we're doing. But there are very real risks associated with delivering ahead of demand, but it's essential if we're to scale up. So it's good to kind of see those points kind of picked out, but also how well advanced we are overall in the policy environment. So in terms of the next presentation, Helen Smith from Scottish Water Horizons. Scottish Water Horizons are a key partner for Clyde Gateway. They've worked with us throughout this project, and we've been on a learning journey with Scottish Water Horizons in terms of how we deliver those projects. So it was absolutely essential that we had them at today's session. So Helen.
Apologies for my very large notes page here. Right. So, good morning everyone. I'm Helen Smith. Quite a few of you probably don't know me in the room, but I'm a business development manager within the Horizons team based in Edinburgh. We've been, for my sort of day job, if you like, my main role is involved in identifying opportunity for heat recovery from Scottish water assets. These can include wastewater treatment works, trunk sewers, CHP and RAD plant at Deer Dykes. Opportunities that we find can be on an individual cluster or on larger heat networks, and as well as identifying opportunities for heat recovery on our existing assets, we're also very much focused on the Horizons assets as well, and that's a slightly different sort of side of things. I've been working with Hugh at Clyde Gateway to aid him with some of the Interreg modular tasks for D2 grids, and this includes events such as today, and also developing the local plans for 5G DHC around the Clyde Gateway, but also rolling that out to other areas, sort of across Scotland. I'm by no means an expert. There's a lot of people who know a lot more about this than I do, but hopefully Hugh and a few folk in the room can keep me straight if I go too far, of course. So really what we're looking today, for the purpose of this from an Interreg point of view, is the role of policymakers in 5G DHC. Okay. So along with the European partners, Clyde Gateway have been considering the role policymakers have to make and how they can contribute in the development of 5G DHC technology. And this has been looked at across Europe over 6 themes. There's the regulatory side, so procedures, permits, creating an attractive environment and removing barriers for 5G DHC, but also in getting the attention of legislative bodies. From a financial perspective, we looked at subsidies and funding, planning, so considering how 5DHC fits into the planning policy, and obviously that was just touched on earlier, that it's not specific within a lot of the planning. But also networking, days like today, how can we get more across the network and have more ambassadors for 5G DHC across Scotland? How do we support participation from of this through us and other industrial bodies? How can Scotland be a market player? How do we expand the heat network market in Scotland, maybe influencing pricing and subsidies? And lastly, research and innovation, so enabling demonstration sites or expanding on these and looking at different technologies and the implementation of these for 5G DHC in new areas. So first, we're going to look at the regulatory role. So policymakers at a local, regional and national level are in charge of procedures, permits, legislations and can create an easier environment and remove the barriers for 5G DHC. So what we want to think about really during this session, if I just move back to the last slide, is what we can do as policymakers to influence this. So we're going to focus on the themes, highlighting the challenges facing policymakers across the European partners, and then link these to some of the findings and the experience within Scotland to date. We've developed some questions in the group which look at each of these themes in turn, and which hopefully will be debated and expanded upon later in the interactive session. So what questions have we been asking ourselves? There are 4 real elements. What's the role that policymakers can have for each of these themes? What challenge do each of these themes present? Looking at existing support structures through policy that are already implemented in Scotland, but the opportunity to develop these or change them. So, if we go to the regulatory role, questions from the European experience. The main challenges that were brought up from Europe was that is there a lack of legislation, or are there too many contradicting regulations? Why is it difficult to receive permits to build or operate 5G DHC networks? And some of these are not just irrelevant for 5G, they're also relevant for 3 and 4. And do we currently have any unclear procedures, regulations or guidance for the district heating sector? And are there any specific targets or regulatory challenges compared to the traditional heat networks? We do have existing support, and that was largely covered in the last presentation, most recently the Heat Networks Act, the Heat in Building Strategy and the Heat Network Delivery Plan. And there are very, very definite opportunities in developing these to remove the barriers to the development of the sector and creating clear legislative policies. From a financial perspective, policymakers can provide financial support in the form of subsidies and funding to the development of 5G DHC. We all know that 5G DHC has a high capital cost, and that limits the type of organisations who might be willing to invest at an early stage. We need early adoption, but this can carry inherent risk through the development of schemes, as we've heard, before signing contracts through with the capacity of heat users. As we heard yesterday, for those that were here, it's likely that this might need to be led from the public sector, but how can policy make this adoption more attractive from a financial perspective and broaden the market further? From Europe, we know that we can encourage the development of 5G DHC, but how do we do that on a financial level? How easy is it to gain funding? What's the experience within this room that we can take forward? And what are the barriers to the financial investment in projects? Again, there is support in Scotland. On the 21st of February, we heard about the new Heat Network Fund. And what's the opportunity there? How can we spread further than the current existing sites? So policymakers can act as networkers to collaborate and provide common operating framework for development of 5G DHC. The challenges that were identified across Europe were really how can policymakers better align heat sources, developers and end users to effectively promote 5G as well as the other 2, 3 and 4. How can we influence networking to promote 5G DHC? Days like this, but how do we spread it further around the country into other zones that are not got as much support? And how do we encourage collaborative multi-sector working groups to influence local policy from both a local and a national level? Scotland have announced creation of a national public energy agency, which will obviously go somewhat to allowing this to happen. And that agency will coordinate the delivery and investment of it and enable the national, regional and local government delivery of heat decarbonisation. There are also some, and certainly from my experience in Edinburgh, there is quite a lot of local things that can help as well. The Edinburgh Clean Heat Network brings together the different areas that can help on this. So from a planning perspective, there's an important responsibility to ensure that there's the spatial planning of a sustainable heat supply within the cities. Again, looking back to the European challenges that were identified, We need to look at how policymakers can inform the planning of 5G DHC as a choice in energy systems, and how this will replace obviously natural gas, and also looking at at what we're comparing it to. How can policymakers ensure that LHE's planning is inclusive of 5G GHC? Again, going into the sort of next generation and next pilot projects, going hand in hand with the planning, and see how we ensure these policies are practically delivered. And there's an opportunity here going into the next phases, but how can we influence 5G further afield? And that's why we're looking at Scotland for the next phase with our delivery plan. From a market playing perspective, so slightly different to just the pure costs, there's a responsibility that we can provide 5GHC as a choice in the energy system that will replace. So I've just jumped, haven't I? Sorry. So we look at the heat network, production and delivery are locally connected, and there'll be only choices if customers deliver heat supplies in the active same framework. How can policymakers influence this? And from a fiscal position, how attractive is using renewable energy, including 5G GHC in the market? We need to look at loans and funding. So the opportunities within Scotland is that it presents an opportunity for energy efficiency and ability to coordinate different heating and cooling sources for a variety of end users. We need to see how that changes from the 4G to the 5G. From a research and innovation view, the Interreg group found the following key challenges. Key innovation gaps still exist, particularly in countries which have not seen wide-scale adoption. How can policymakers address the innovation gaps, including developing a business case for technology and control systems? They also found unique and novel characteristics of 5G GHC with high capex, and the importance of having sufficient cooling demand can all create a challenging business case for 5G. From a Scottish water perspective, from a Scottish perspective, if we go outside, and talk to people in more regional areas, there's sometimes a low understanding of 5G outside the immediate adoption area. So council areas who are not involved in pilot projects may be unaware of the potential benefits of 5G, and therefore not fully considered when listing options for district heating to date. So we need to find a way of getting these into the new pilot projects. And with help of Hugh, we sort of listed what really from a Scottish context, finally, from all those elements, the most strategic opportunities to develop 5G in Scotland. And these were suggested as follows. So the key thing is developing advanced projects, ensuring that 5G is incorporated into the LHE's plans. Development and implementation of connection incentives and requirements for 5G. The business case, as Dorian hinted on, will always remain a challenge. However, it's likely to develop as the use of 5G DHC increases in Europe. For the Glasgow, the 4 initial LHEs have already been identified. Probably a lot of people are aware. We need to prioritise funding for research and development with a focus on raising awareness and research outputs, especially around the business model, and mapping appropriate networks for 5G DHC, and that could be by overlaying different GIS systems. For Glasgow, the continued development of the D2 Grid's local action plans with close integration with the local authority, which can then be replicated in other local authority areas. The use of the heat delivery unit at the Scottish Government as part of the drive towards carbon targets, and the part this could play in setting targets, is the fourth. And lastly, developing a focus on the business model to a modular solution to the energy needs and heating and cooling to suit 21st century buildings. So apologies, that was a bit garbled, but we got there eventually. That's us.
Thank you very much, Helen. I'm going to leave those particular points just on the screen for a moment, because I think those priorities for policymakers, and in particular the integration with the LHEs that we've touched on, are probably key points. I think earlier on in the presentation there was some excellent questions I think that can be used as part of our kind of breakout sessions as we move through the rest of the afternoon. Back again to the kind of financial points as well, the pricing and taxes associated with heating and cold supply. As part of the D2 Grids project and working with ASPR, we've been considering these points around the business case. You know, how we charge for heat, how we charge for cooling, how we manage and monitor that. And particularly in the cooling market, that's a particular challenge for us, is how we manage the pricing model against that. So it's interesting to see that on the slide. And then a point which we've touched on across a couple of days, but research and innovation. The projects that we're delivering have research and innovation as part and parcel of that, of course, but it's how we roll that out wider, and that speaks a little to the report that Scottish Enterprise produced as well. So thank you very much for that. The next presentation, the kind of star turn that we had yesterday and again today, is looking at the AMIDS project. I think for all of us that are involved in these types of projects, looking at projects that are advanced and delivering on the ground, absolutely fantastic. We've seen the Clyde Bank example earlier on, project we're quite envious of, but this one as well. So pleased to welcome Kevin and Sam up, who are going to take us through over the next half hour or so, project at AMIDS. Thank you.
Let's see, Sam made it. Hi everyone, thanks to Martin and the team at Clyde Gateway and D2 Grids for inviting us along to talk about our AMIDS project, which we're always happy to do. Apologies for anyone that was there yesterday. This is going to look quite familiar, but we'll try and tweak it to suit the policy agenda. My name is Kevin Waters. I work for Renfrewshire Council in their City Deal Infrastructure team. We work in all the council City Deal projects, which includes spin-offs such as AMIDS and the district heating project, for which I lead for the council. And we've got Sam from Borough Happold, who's have been pivotal in identifying the concept, developing the concept, and we've retained them as we construct the project as well. Yesterday we had James Reid from FES, who are our contractor building the network. Unfortunately, James is also under the weather, so can't make it today, so sends his apologies. As I said yesterday, the good news is I think we've got a 35-minute slot. We don't intend taking anywhere near that, so hopefully we won't be keeping anyone back from their coffee too much longer. I'll just start with a whistle-stop tour of what AMIDS is, just to give a bit of background to those who don't know. I think most in the room probably do, so I'll try and make that as quick as possible. AMIDS is it's the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District for Scotland. Aims to be Scotland's home of advanced manufacturing. It's a location adjacent to Glasgow Airport within Renfrewshire, and between the towns of Paisley and Renfrew. It's a collaborative project between Renfrewshire Council and the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise, a local and national priority to create jobs and make AMIDS the home of Scotland's national manufacturing. We've already attracted 2 national manufacturing institutes, so we've got more acronyms: NMIS, which is the one with the heather roof, and the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre. So NMIS stands for the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland. So that'll be looking at manufacturing challenges for any sort of sector within Scotland. So from food and beverage to engineering and everything in between. The Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre is run by the Centre for Process Improvement, and they're looking at pharmaceutical challenges. One of their first challenges, for example, is how we make tablets and pills. It's the way we've always done it. We bash them out, and there's lots of ways. So one of their first challenges will be, how do we make them better? What the ethos behind AMIDS is that we've got these 2 really strong anchor tenants, and we're hoping that other companies and organisations will want to locate beside them, collaborate with them. But one of our key aspirations from the start was that Amos will be focused on net zero from the ground up. So the enabling infrastructure, which is the new roads, bridges, utilities, that was funded through the city deal. So from the design that looked at the embedded carbon and the carbon reduction. And one of the other things obviously we looked at was a district heating network. So how would we set the example for a low carbon on-site generation of renewable energy? Already, in between the NMIS and MIC, we quite quickly saw a very different approach. NMIS were focused on net zero, so they had air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar, etc. MMIC, because policy allowed, we're looking at gas-fired CHP and backup boilers. So thankfully, by getting the district heating over the line, we've managed to avoid that, and now anyone coming to Amos in the future will be mandated to connect to the low carbon district heating network. Again, I won't talk too much, covered most of these points on the slide. On the left is the image probably 6 months or so ago, or say that was 2021. So the road is in place. NMIS and MIC are just about complete, and our district heating network just up the river and into the centre of the site, and then spins off into each building. I think I've got a slide later on, we can touch on that. Just give a bit more of geography in context. Number 1 is the site that we just saw. Number 2 is in Shannon, which is already home to other advanced manufacturing companies such as Rolls-Royce, Terumo Aortic, Peak Scientific, and part of the NMIS group. They've got the Advanced Forming Research Centre, which is well established over there. And number 3 is Westway, which is Scotland's largest enclosed business park, home to Doosan Babcock, Scottish Renewables, the Lightweight Manufacturing Centre, which is also part of the NMIS group. So a whole cluster of existing skills and expertise, and Amos hopes to bring all them together. It's just some more images in our master plan, and touch on in a slide or two. One of the reasons why we plumped for the 5th generation network was it's scalable, and the capital outlay for the 5th generation, it lent itself to the unknown nature of development for Amos. We've got NMIS, we've got MIC. Who else comes on board? We don't know. We're obviously confident and hopeful that Amos will build out, in some form, probably not as the master plan shows, but that's just to demonstrate the flexibility and the scale of development that we have at Amos. And as and when each building will come on board, we'll expand the network, and heat pumps or other low carbon technology will go in as and when those buildings come online. So on to the good stuff that we're here to talk about is the district heating network. So one of the key points for me for this slide is that the time it takes. We've been on this journey since 2018. We were introduced to through our conversations on what Amos might look like, Scottish Enterprise, and that's when I first met Colin from Scottish Enterprise, who found £5,000 down the back of the SE sofa to give us our first energy assessment, and unsurprisingly that identified that Amos was suitable for a district heating network. What that looked like, we had no idea, and we went through. Colin and his team at SE then introduced us to the Scottish Government's Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme, now the Heat Network Fund, so Amy and our team, and we've all been on that journey together. So it's been an iterative process of small pockets of funding to take us through from that in early energy assessment through to identifying the concept. And Sam and his team came on board, and we've been on that journey to develop the concept through to what we're now building, and the business case ultimately was approved by the council at the end of 2020. And we'll jump on in a couple of slides to then show how we've got to where we have. So we got LCIP match funding for capital, which was crucial for the project to become viable, or certainly to become palatable to the council, and we were also successful in the RHI tariff guarantee for the revenue element of the heat pumps. I'll now pass you over to Sam, who'll talk a bit more technical. Cheers.
So going back to the previous slide from Kevin, it's funny, he said this yesterday, this has been a long journey for me. It feels like a very short one. I'm kind of used to district heat networks taking years and years to kind of get out of the ground and back in the ground. And then for us, even buildings sometimes take 4 or 5 years from a concept to completion. So in some ways, I think for us it's felt quite quick, and that has been possibly driven by the kind of funding opportunities. So we came on board through work we do with Zero Waste Scotland and the framework that we're on with them. We do pre-feasibility, feasibility, and even up to business case studies with them, and that is trying to identify opportunities to deliver low carbon energy, often through district energy networks such as this. When we came on board, as Kevin said, there was an initial piece of work that looked at the phasing of the development, potential heat loads, but had a variety of different options in terms of how we deliver that heat. And through our sort of taking that to the next level of detail, we identified that 5G was the best solution for AMIDs. The reasons for that, I guess Kevin's touched on a bit about scale and sort of building the system up as future tenants hopefully arrive on the site. And a key part of that is the lower cost of the pipes. So we have plastic pipes uninsulated, which take us about 1.5 kilometres from the wastewater treatment to the south of the site, up to the site. And there's a significantly different cost in terms of that pipe infrastructure compared to insulated steel pipes. And that was quite important because our business case was looking at various different phases and what happens if we get more tenants in certain different timeframes. And between us and the council, there's a leap of faith in terms of those future tenants, but we had to be quite clear that we couldn't speculate on full build out because that would take, one, a long time, the return on investment would be significant in terms of it being drawn out, and there was a lot of speculation there. So we found the kind of halfway ground of where we felt we were comfortable, and a key part to that was the cost of that infrastructure at the start was reduced because it was a 5G network. In terms of that flexibility as well, there's the benefit of those heat pumps going into the buildings, so we're not having to create a huge electrical infrastructure back at a centralised energy centre. A lot of that cost is kind of effectively landed as these buildings arrive later down the line. We're also obviously excited by the opportunity of because of the nature of these buildings, the potential for future high cooling demands, and that gave us the opportunity to think about higher efficiency in the future phases. Unfortunately, because of the timing of us getting this scheme sort of through the process, the two buildings were already quite far along in their design. So MMIC was going down a gas boiler, gas CHP route. I think it's kind of credit to everyone that worked on this and to them as well that we managed to move them away from that because it was a very low heat cost from that system to generating a low carbon heat at a significantly higher price. That's really credit that they came on that journey with us, and if they hadn't, then this probably would have stalled. NMIS, as Kevin said, we're already looking at a more low carbon cost, and as such the kind of counterfactual, the difference in cost of heat for connecting to the network was much lower. In terms of the overview, very high level sort of schematic, for those that don't know the scheme, we're taking water from the wastewater and treatment plants. We decided to do that at the cleanest point of the system. That reduces the amount of maintenance costs, but also from a kind of infrastructure perspective and the logistics on the site, that was the simplest place to locate the energy centre. From there, we've got a small energy centre which just literally takes the heat from that outfall chamber, pumps it all the way to our site, and then each of the buildings we've got the heat pumps. We also have resilience provided by, in the case of the AMIDs, a backup gas boiler. That was essential for them because of their timing. They had to get the building commissioned, heat on to commission their systems, which are kind of critical to the operation, before we were ready to turn the network on. For NMIS, it's electric boilers, and that's the vision for the rest of the plan. We want to provide some resilience at the sites, often because some of these buildings are mission critical. They need heat 100% of the year, but doing that through electrified heat, zero emissions. To go into a bit more detail, and this maybe strikes more to sort of some of the issues from a policy perspective. 4G, 3G networks can be quite clean in terms of that demarcation. You bring the pipes into the building, you have a plate heat exchanger which typically doesn't take up a lot of space, and you have a separation of the systems. The way that this works is that we don't have that clear boundary between our system and their heating system. So that can create some interesting challenges, I suppose, from a point of view of the legality of this, the kind of commercial aspects, But also I suppose that it requires a lot of cooperation and collaboration between the two different parties. Their system needs to be commissioned correctly, as does ours, and we need to make sure that they're both operating and maintained correctly so we don't do damage to each other's system. Also, I suppose the complexity of we're talking about kilometres of pipework. We go from the wastewater treatment plant, which is obviously owned by Scottish Water, through highways into the AMID site, and then into their plant rooms, and then we need to talk to their systems, they need to talk to ours. So a bit more complicated, but definitely worth the extra effort. Back to you, Gavin.
Okay, so covered some of this, but this was a slide just to say, once we got the go-ahead from Council at the end of December, LCITP funding in March 2021, and the RHI tariff guarantee, as Sam says, does feel like a long journey from 2018, but since we got that go-ahead, it's been fairly fast-paced. So we got heat supply agreements concluded in June. Sarah Jane spoke earlier, and we'll probably think that one bullet point doesn't do that justice, given how long it took. But again, I think it's, the more we do these things, the more we've got templates, and we can share those learnings with other local authorities, or indeed with other networks within the Roundshire area. Land agreements and access to sewers were concluded as well, and again they were difficult in the absence of the Heat Act that Sarah Jane talked about earlier as well. There was no compulsory purchase power, so we were powerless other than voluntary agreements with, and it was two relatively small parcels of private land that our network went through. But that caused us a considerable amount of pain and time to get those agreements over the line. So we actually went out to tender on kind of two routes, a longer route and a shorter route, and eventually, thankfully, got those agreements. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the project, because the tenders that came back for the longer route come back, unaffordable and unviable. So we awarded the contract to FES last August. And construction started in October, and with the Cabinet Secretary out to lay the first pipes, and since then it's been really good progress made by the team, FES, and our site supervision team includes Rambo, Turner Townsend, and we retained Borough Happold as technical advisors, and I would cover that in a couple of slides time. I think that's worked really well, that team collaboration approach, having Sam and his team on board to kind of be keepers of the business case, I guess, and able to challenge when during design review meetings, etc., and remind us what the design intent was. So I think having all those different parties around the table has really helped, and as Sam said, Endless and MIC to bring them along with us. There was times where their design was too far advanced and it looks like it might not happen. And we've just had to kind of keep those open and honest conversations going, and to do what's the right thing, which is to have a low carbon renewable heat source on the site. We've learned that we've got much more than this, and we do regular lessons learned meetings during the project. We've got another one on tomorrow on site, so we probably should have more up here, but as I've already touched on in terms of the programme, councils, public bodies by their very nature have lots of red tape. When you bring lots of public bodies together, council, government, Scottish Water, Horizons, it's been a real challenge to get those aligning, especially when we've had various moving targets, funding calls, to fit into them. We've not always been ready, so we've had to kind of work around that. But hopefully I think that's changing with the new Heat Network Fund, in terms of rather than windows, it's a bit more open-ended, which I do think will help. And as I touched on, the competing programmes of the heat customers. Affordability is crucial. Martin touched on that earlier. The capital cost, albeit lower for fifth generation than traditional fourth generation, due to the sort of lower pipe work and lower upfront capital costs. It's still a significant outlay for the council. I mean, we couldn't have done it without the LCITP funding, and indeed even though we got the RHI for the revenue gap, there is still a revenue gap. I think that was touched upon earlier, and the building before the demand. So the council have taken a leap of faith. The business case doesn't stack up with only two customers, And I think, you know, that was almost a showstopper. You know, we worked with Paul and Colin, the team there, to look at, you know, is there anything else out there, and there wasn't at the time. So hopefully as more and more of these projects come online, there'll be some form of ongoing revenue risk share, if you like, and to help more organisations take that leap of faith. I've already touched on land assembly and requiring buy-in from the lead organisation. And Martin, it was a big point that was raised yesterday, is that it needs someone to, you know, pick up the reins and run with us. And thankfully, you know, we've been very fortunate that Renfrew Council have done that with support from partners to you know, lead the way and develop this project. That has required determination and a flexible approach. Said, you know, there was countless times where we had various meetings where it didn't look like it was going to happen, and various setbacks before we even got to, you know, spades in the ground. So it's not easy, but the peer support, so being introduced from SE to LTITP and the partners, you know, Zero Waste Scotland, Scottish Future Trust, I feel as if we've all been on this journey, and we've retained those relationships and built upon them. But it's also important, I think, for events like this, being introduced to other local authorities, other organisations doing things, so Clyde Gateway, Stirling, Queen's Quay. You know, you can learn lessons from each other, but I found it comforting. You know, sometimes it feels like you're on your own, and it's not council core business. I certainly, similar to what Helen was saying, you know, I'm not an expert on 5th generation or district heat networks by any means. That's why, you know, we've got these guys with us, but it's reassuring to know that there's other people and other organisations doing it alongside you. I'll pass you over to Sam, and then either Sam or I will try and take you through Fez's slides since I'm not here.
Yeah, I think a lot of these points Kevin's possibly touched on before, but I guess focusing on sort of from the technical economic analysis that we did, there's a perception here that what we're doing is challenging, brand new, but it's a combination of lots of technologies that we use in various different applications already, and it's just pulling them together and understanding how they work in unison. Yesterday we touched on some of the supply chain issues, and I think obviously the more of these projects go ahead, the less of those issues and perceived challenges will come out, and also hopefully some of this demand can be met in the local market in terms of supply of some of these products. From an economic perspective, we mentioned trying to get MMIC on board was incredibly challenging because it was a gas boiler, sort of counterfactual. Obviously that's going to be not an issue in the future, where zero emissions heating becomes the de facto, and I guess this opportunity is really interesting. I mean, from the studies that we've done just 2 years ago, that really the sort of results are changing drastically, because we're now looking at buildings that have constraints for space. They might not be able to fit air source heat pumps, so we're looking at a counterfactual of maybe an electric boiler. So in these types of systems we can supply heat that is significantly cheaper than potentially what they're going to have to do if it's a retrofit, or even if it's a new build. Air source heat pumps and perceived challenges with fitting them on buildings, and also I suppose the efficiencies of those and the climate that we have really gives us an opportunity to push this out and show that it is value for money compared to where we're going if you don't consider these types of networks. In terms of tendering, Kevin mentioned that we kind of went through the process twice. We kind of got to a point where there was an unaffordability, and part of that we did go through a stage 2 design and tried to get as much buy-in as possible from the market. We did a cost plan, but I think ultimately we were short in terms of the cost of those pipes, and I think that's where getting contractors in, getting some of that experience, maybe doing a 2-stage tender might have alleviated some of those headaches, but we got there in the end. But again, as these projects become more the norm, I think that the pricing of that will be far more accurate, and we can learn from other benchmarks. From a regulatory perspective, I guess one of the key challenges for us was working in partnership with Scottish Water to try and understand how we take heat from their system and understand the kind of challenges associated with that. But again, with every project, this just gets easier and easier, and I think if we were to do this project again, a lot of those challenges would not be there. And then finally, I guess from a point of view of how we look at these projects, the piece that we did initially was very focused from a techno-economic and carbon benefit, but it's kind of really the whole piece, and I think this project here, the D2 Grids, really captures that fantastically. It's a holistic approach. It's not just considering the benefits of price of heat, the emissions, it's the other benefits and how this system can help from a strategic, economic, commercial and financial perspective. And I think from the council's point of view, I think thinking about that in the whole really helped deliver this project. If we'd just gone down thinking purely cost of heat, the carbon emissions, I don't think it would have got off the ground. I can cover a few. go for it. Yeah. I guess we touched on the second point there about the size of the pipes and some of the challenges there. The first one was really about where the marketplace is just now. There's some really small pieces of plant which we think would be completely inconsequential for delivering this system that have completely stalled it for just now. Small microchips and pumps and things like that, which are just creating lead times of months where it should be days or weeks. We managed to get about 1.5 kilometre pipe work on programme, and it's now the smallest bits which are causing the issue. Hopefully those issues are going to be alleviated in the next few years, but it's worth considering for any projects that are going forward that could have a major impact on programme. In terms of coordination, this project was fortunate that there was a lot of infrastructure work that was done already. From an ideal perspective, if we were sort of starting this maybe 2 or 3 years earlier, we'd have laid these pipes at the same time. That would have been far more cost efficient, and obviously that's the way that we'd want to take any new builds in the future. But at least that work had been done in terms of proving that the routes were viable, and there was thankfully very few challenges in terms of the coordination of the pipework despite its size, all the way from the wastewater treatment plants up to the final section. Some of the issues that we're experiencing, you can see this is the plant room here. Because those buildings that we were connecting into already had a sort of existing stage 4 design, they were quite tight, being honest about it, and Fez have done a fantastic job in terms of working with those contractors and their design team to try and integrate this plant. And I think the lessons learned for me as a designer is not to underestimate that space. It's significant. You're bringing really big pipes in, and sometimes it's just the coordination of some of the simple things which can take the hardest and then the longest to do. So it's a real challenge, and I think going forward we'd obviously do things differently. We'd perhaps create our own space, but it's not to be underestimated for future projects. The RHI extension was a massive relief. If that hadn't happened, we would have been in a lot of trouble. So that's been significant. We were right to the wire, and again, that leap of faith, we had very little slack in our original programme based on the original RHI date, but there was a momentum there and a drive from the council to go forward, which has to be credited. Do you want to cover the last two? I think they're really good for you.
So stakeholder engagement, I think I've kind of touched on that, but working with Scottish Water in particular, I think we're took cognizance of the fact that it's a live wastewater treatment works. It had to continue operations, so we worked with Helen's team, and we got a dedicated project manager just to kind of smooth that from Scottish Water Horizons to kind of smooth that process. And it took us a long time to get the agreement for the lease and the access to sewer agreement, but the work on the ground has went relatively smoothly. I don't think there's been any issues there at all. Touch wood. And in terms of planning, Sam mentioned we were putting in the enabling infrastructure. So as the sort of concept of the district heating was crystallising, we managed to tweak our design for enabling infrastructure to put in ducts through roads, and more importantly, I think ducts in the bridge. Without that, we'd have been looking at directional drilling, which we considered, and I think it's safe to say the cost of that would have torpedoed our business case. So a key lesson from us is that as and when we're doing any sort of infrastructure works, I would hope that encourage the council to put in future-proof it, put in the ducts, put in anything that we can, or indeed, as Sam says, do it at the same time. One of the things that I didn't mention, which I was moaning about this morning to Sarah Jane and Amy, was as well as the supply chain delays that has delayed the project at the moment. The other thing that would have delayed us and may still, depending on when we get the delivery of that key equipment, is the electricity connection from Spain. We applied for that 1 MVA connection in September, October last year, and we're still going through the process of agreeing, leases, or Scottish Power are going through the process of agreeing leases with Scottish Water, because it's on their land, and the energisation of that is, it's a kind of who knows. which has been a big frustration of us. So if there's anyone in the room who knows a solution for that, then please let me know, because I think that will cause problems, as Martin touched on at the start. As more projects like this come on board, as we transition to electric vehicles, etc., the infrastructure needs to increase. We all know that. However, at the pace that we found it, I think it could become an issue. I think the next slide is almost a duplication of previous work, so previous slides, so I'll not go through that in any more detail. And we'll just finish on we've got some questions later, I think, but that's just some nice images I think of. So the top left is our energy centre, and bottom left is as the pipes come out of the ground, so that's the last of the pipe work, and on the right is the pipe work in Public Road and Wright Street in the middle, and on the right was a Friday afternoon a couple of months ago when we got the pipes through the bridge, which was a momentous moment, because if those were blocked, I don't know what we would have done. So there were drinks had that night. So that's us.
Excellent. Thank you. So thank you very much. An excellent presentation. Again, maybe just picking out a couple of points to this time. Ownership demarcation and how we deal with that. These are multifaceted projects requiring a number of people to come together, as well as using public and private assets, and so how we address that from a policy perspective is quite interesting. Second point was around land assembly in the absence of statutory powers. At Clyde Gateway, we were able to work with our partners and deliver things like agency CPOs and so forth. But to have the kind of flexibility to deliver heat networks in the way that utility providers do under their current legislation, I think is something that's required. What that would allow us to do is to work more joined up and cohesively with a range of partners and stakeholders, so that when picking up on a point about Edinburgh digging up roads, if we can get joined up thinking, get combined utilities in, bring in heat networks when we can and in advance of need, then that would certainly be a significant step forward. Interesting to see the challenges in delivery of the projects as well, very similar to the experiences that we have here in Clyde Gateway. Okay, thank you everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed your coffee, had an opportunity to participate at the poster. Now, just going to do three things. Eugenia's going to come back up and feedback on the poster. We're then going to do a Q&A, and I'll be joined by Hugh and Sarah Jane, an opportunity for you guys to ask questions. And then we're going to do what's called Mentimeter. So hopefully you've all got connection to the World Wide Web, www, nobody types that in anymore, but menti.com. But before we get on to Mentimeter and all the good live action, Eugenia's going to come back up and just feedback on the poster.
Yeah, let's see. So, as you might have noticed, there were a few repetitions in the papers because there was some mistake with the printing. We didn't figure that out so well. So, the great thing is that actually, like you noticed, some of the papers that we provided actually fit in several of the categories, and that is completely correct and reasonable. So, here are some things that we came up with in the project with my colleague Anna, and let's see, everyone agreed that improving energy efficiency falls under the SDG number 7. You also added this decentralized and low temperature heat sources and the decarbonization of district energy. I believe that's reasonable. We also added it helps balancing the electricity grid. And balancing the electricity grid and integrating renewable energy sources, which actually overlaps with one of the posts you added, which was utilizing renewable energy sources. Also, you added using waste heat to reduce costs. That also falls under there. Then for SDG number 9, Yeah, the technological progress in DHC was also identified by us. You put it there as well. You added heat pump technology and local producers. That is in line with, I believe, sustainable industrialization, and rolling out of 5G DHC was also one of your additions. Infrastructure and access to the district heating and cooling improvements. Rolling out 5G DHC, it's basically the same thing. Sustainable cities and communities, SDG number 11. I just go one back. It reduces energy consumption and pollution in cities. That's also, you also put it under there. You added utilizing local heat sources for local benefits. We added heating and cooling for growing population and urban expansions. You also brought heat pumps at source, mean not having to accommodate the least efficient building. We added sustainable cities and sustainable and resilient cities. For number 12, decentralized and low temperature heat sources was also identified under there by you. And you also added no waste heat, closing the loop, waste heat recovery and repurposing infrastructure and sources. And that, we identified resource efficiency, sustainable lifestyles, and circular economies. Which circular economy is also a big topic under the responsible consumption and production, and since the idea behind 5th generation district heating and cooling is a circular system, we also categorize that there. And finally, for climate action, obviously, the decarbonization of the district energy was obviously identified by all of you under there. You also added some of the items that were identified by us under other categories. You also added here reducing energy consumption and pollution in cities. Of course, that also falls under there. Also, you added coupling with renewable backup sources. Renewable power sources was also identified by us, and local sources and the green economy transition. So overall, I think that was pretty clear for everyone where this SDG is coming to place regarding 5G DHC. So that's quite positive, I think.
Thank you. Okay, that's excellent. Hopefully we'll get a few questions on that as well. But maybe Sarah Jane and Hugh, maybe if you could just join me up on the stools, ready for you there. No, you'll be fine on the interact, because you guys will be shifting once we get onto the technology stuff, which actually went very, very well yesterday. So no pressure on you to perform as well as yesterday's group did. So we've heard this morning from a range of speakers. We've touched on a number of points around policy. We've talked about ownership, demarcation, land assembly. We talked about research and information, priorities for policy makers. We talked about making the right decisions over the long term. We heard from our pilots. We heard some amazing stats around our uptake of natural gas at 80%, renewables at 20%, and the regulation and economic barriers. So hopefully there'll be a few questions from the audience. But before we do that, Sarah Jane was introduced earlier on, who's been working with us on a range of projects, and this is Hugh Moore from Clyde Gateway. We talk about leadership, and we tend to think about leadership as organisational leadership and about having strong boards and making the big decisions, but you need internal leadership as well, and you need the disruptors within the organisation who are prepared to challenge the orthodoxy, and Hugh is our kind of in-house disruptor. So as much as I'm kind of here presenting to you over the course of these 2 days, then actually it's Hugh in the background has been the leader in the work that we have been doing, and in terms of developing the relationships with the various organisations. So we wouldn't have been able to deliver the projects that we have without Hugh. So I'm delighted he's joining us just now. I'll give you all a moment to maybe think about a question, but I'm maybe going to pick up on some of the points that came from Helen's slide, but about focusing on the business model and the ability for 5G DHC to be modular. Hugh, kind of some thoughts on that, about that kind of modular and scalability of this type of technology?
Yeah, so I think that is, I think, one of the kind of key attractions we've touched on. Kevin touched on it in terms of the capex that's been delivered. There's difficulties in getting to that point, but and I noticed there was a wee bit of contradiction in terms of some of the stuff that came out of the Scottish Enterprise Report. So it's an area certainly that we need to look at, not helped of course by current sort of economic climate, but that ability to modularise is critical, but also alongside, I think, the ability to integrate with other energy systems. So the thermal and power grid elements connected together are all critical, I think, to that modular growth, and we can't lose sight of that. So as much as there's an emphasis on decarbonising heat for obvious reasons in Scotland, the elephant in the room essentially is the power equation. We've talked about what's happened with the RHI, but clearly joining those elements together and having a model effectively that allows them to work efficiently, because the whole reason for doing that is clearly to come up with a sustainable business model. We can't really do it without both of those elements together, and that all eventually translates through to the bottom line in terms of the commercials. And that's probably been the key thing for us in terms of the timescale to get to the point where we're up to the point of delivery, is spending that time not just on the outputs in terms of greenhouse gas reductions and increase in renewable energy sources, but in getting the commercial model right.
Yeah, and that's, looking at those revenue models has been something in particular, and that's where we've had to kind of develop skills and expertise in that. Kind of picking up on that point, Sarah Jane, I mean, we looked at one of the points that came up earlier on was about prioritising funding for R&D. It's been something that the industry probably needs to come forward to. But do you think there is a lack of risk appetite, or is industry risk adverse? Are you seeing that when you're pulling together these heat supply agreements and where you're trying to transfer the risk to and from?
I'm not sure that it's so much a risk aversion as such. It's about a risk benefit equation. So people are willing to take risk if there's something in it for them for taking that risk. And so if you're trying to sell heat to a big industrial user or something like that, and they're saying, okay, well that might be a bit more risky for me because I'm not familiar with it, it seems risky. If you can offer them that at a cheaper price, or you can offer them better security of supply or a more stable price, then that becomes something that's attractive. Of course, then the flip side of that is, well, who's going to take the risk of delivering the heat network, and any benefit that goes out to the customers, downside potentially for the network operator, and there are both private and public sector people out there trying to deliver heat networks, and it's about trying to get a model again that works, where there's a degree of risk, but there's a benefit there that compensates for taking that risk.
Yeah, okay. Any questions from the audience? Sam?
I have one for you, Hugh. I'm interested if you sort of go back to the start of your journey to recommend something or give advice to someone just at the start. How easy was it for you to sort of identify, one, the funding available to kind of get it off the ground, and two, the you mentioned capital funding that would support the project, and then secondly, the kind of peer group that everyone said is really valuable. And so, how easy was that for you? If there's anything that could change to make it easier for others?
Okay, I'll maybe just see if there's any other questions from the audience. We maybe could take 2 or 3 at the same time. No, I'm sure you'll think of something. Maybe come on at that point, you then, just around looking at the kind of capital elements and how we've developed the project.
Yeah, not easy probably is the answer, but it's part of that journey over a fairly long period of time. So I mean, I go back to I think probably 2015. I think we started to look at the initial strategy and what could be done, and that sort of partly came through our original energy and carbon master plan that we did in 2012. So we had quite a good body of work done in the power network, in terms of Clyde Gateway area, and also on the potential for district heating, mainly through the Viridor site at the time. And we started to kind of develop our ideas from that, but the direction of travel was changing towards much more local resilience and the like, and then we were trying to see how that could be developed. So what was very positive was was the collaborative agreement, and you know, we've mentioned Scottish Water Horizons earlier on today, but that kind of collaboration for local players coming together at the right time in the right place was very helpful and very positive towards that discussion. We were kind of preaching to the converted in many ways, but a lot of the sort of challenges I think are around trying to engage with the market in terms of how that sort of energy could be delivered, how it could be provided at a cost-effective in a cost-effective way, essentially. So you know, that I suppose has been part of many conversations in terms of property developers. Initially, we had identified a range of players who are already sort of constructing at the moment in terms of potential connections, but and I'm sure we've all been there. It was not at the right time, or the engagement was just not happening along the development lines, and then convincing of the sort of design process that they were going through before they were putting a spade in the ground. So those kind of challenges were difficult, but I think we've kind of made certainly key steps forward now. I think the messaging has got out to the wider community now about what they need to strive to get to. So I can feel the environment a lot easier and engaging that way. In fact, there's been a few chats we've had recently on a more sort of proactive approach from developers to engaging with district heating.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is capital's easy, revenue's hard, and you know, there's a number of funding sources out there. We can bid for cocktails of funding. You know, we've got 60% European funding going against D2 grids. So capital's easy, but it's revenue's a hard point. Return on investment becomes a big talking point, particularly when we're working with our commercial partners. But for an organisation like ours, and for other local authorities as well, is that you can absorb that grant-assisted capital and effectively write it off. You don't necessarily need to consider it in the full business case, and then you just look at the revenue model. So we've had the benefit of being able to do that, to separate out the capital funding as a sunk cost and then just focus in on the revenue model. If you then bring that capital element in and you're looking for a return on investment over even a 25 to 40 year period, actually many projects are going to be underwater before you start. So we need to kind of change our thinking on how we address that capital, and we need to think a much longer term. And for me, on a district heating system, you probably shouldn't be any less than 40 years in terms of the planning. 25 an absolute minimum, but really you probably want to get 40 years in order to be able to kind of get that coming through. On that point, Sarah Jane, are you seeing more appetite from developers or from others in terms of investing into these types of systems?
From property developers? No. I think there's the odd business that is sort of forward looking and thinks they can sell green, and I'm sure many more of them could sell green than are selling green. But you know, particularly if you're a housing property developer, I mean, it's not even part of your business model. You just want to build houses and sell them to people. You know, you're not really interested in how low carbon they are unless it's to meet a building regulation standard, which isn't quite there yet.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, if we look at, you know, building regulations as well, and we're talking about the broader policy landscape as well, you know, we've been talking about the heat network bill and all of that, and that's great, but it's about actually getting it down to the basic bricks and mortar level. You know, how are we delivering on commercial development? How are we delivering on residential development? And how can we get heat network ready? That came up yesterday in terms of retrofit. Probably has been a challenge, but for me it's also a new build challenge as well, on how we balance those sources out. Is there any other questions from the group?
I just make this one observation than a question, but on that point, it's maybe acquiescence rather than appetite from developers, but they'll still find the cheapest way of solving that low carbon problem. But with local authorities increasingly bringing forward target dates for net zero, and that means different things to different authorities, but we're seeing quite a few who say net zero by 2030, and at least translating that for development sites to say that we're not having gas on this site. And then you're looking at a heat network versus another low carbon counterpatch. But that changes it massively.
Yeah.
But I would maybe frame it as acquiescence.
Yeah. It's a very good point.
Appetite.
Yeah. Yeah, it's carrot and stick, I guess, is probably if I was simplifying it down, and we need to make sure that we have those levers in place. Okay, well thank you. Well, thank you to Sarah Jane and thank you to Hugh, who are going to join us back in the audience. And we're going to try the interactive session now. So, anybody need the Wi-Fi code? No? We all good? Right. Okay, sure, lovely. Right, okay, so if you're on menti.com, and hopefully all going well, if I click on this now, that will take us into the first question. So if you have £100 million to invest in energy transformation, what priority would you give? So there's a few there: solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, hydrogen, nuclear. I know very, 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 very little about hydrogen, so don't vote for that. I can't make any comments on it. Well, that's interesting in terms of geothermal coming up there at the top. Oh, been overtaken by other, so there's probably maybe a self-interest group in as well. I think yesterday it was interesting in that I think we had geothermal probably sat about third yesterday. Hydrogen was a little bit higher as well, and very little in terms of some of the other votes as well. But that's good to see that. Hydropower, interesting. Solar, okay, still moving, still shifting.
Solar was really low yesterday.
Solar was very, very low yesterday, which was an interesting point because with D2 grids and with our other European projects, and we are looking at solar PV and battery storage as an integrated part of the development to offset the running of the heat pumps. Okay, I'm going to cut you off on that. Solar energy, wind power and geothermal. Okay, moving on to the next question. How would you rate from 0 to 10 the available renewable energy sources in terms of priority to make the most impact on the energy needs of Glasgow? So river water, mines, wastewater, wind, green hydrogen and solar. Okay, well, good to see mines coming up there. Oh, moving down. Back up, river water. I think with the project at Clyde Bank and using the river as a heat source, you kind of see that as a kind of obvious point for Glasgow. And I think what we've heard from BGS over the last couple of days, and even from some of the experience earlier on with places like Shettleston and so forth, mine workings is an element there. Wastewater, just coming up there as well. That was something that came through the Scottish Enterprise report in terms about the capacity that was available within the wastewater treatment works. And then yesterday when we were talking about 5G DEC, talking about having energy sources less than 10 kilometres away. And if you think about the wastewater treatment network across Scotland, then you can see the huge potential for that. Okay. So the next question, at what temperature is your thermostat set to at home in winter? Now, somebody had less than 16 degrees yesterday, and we were all looking about for the person dressed in a jumper. So there's a couple of people there. Right, so, okay, so you're a pretty basic group. You're all on 21 to 22 really, aren't you? Yeah? So, but a bit of a range there. And I think as, I was chatting to somebody earlier on and saying, as energy prices start to come up, I think the consumers are going to be much more observant of the energy that they're using. So an interesting point there. Now, you're probably right. Please pin in this Glasgow map a potential area for 5G HTC. Now, you can zoom in and drop in. It's a pretty... There's not a lot of context to this question. There wasn't any yesterday, and it completely excludes South Lanarkshire, but good to see somebody puts one in there. If you can see the bunny ears in the middle of the just at Parkhead to Marnock, that is Cunningham Loop. Now, interesting, yesterday what we started to see a bit more of was people congregating around the river kind of zones as well. For me, it was about looking probably eastwards in terms of mine and mine working, and then secondly probably in the city centre in terms of density of development. and probably the ability to deliver at scale. Retrofit challenge, a bit more complex within that. Okay, some pretty widespread. Easter House been an interesting one as well. I think some potentials up there in terms of mine workings as well. Okay, that's good. That's pretty broadly aligns with a number of the research points that we've had. And then this is the last one. So we're actually asking you to type in here. I didn't think anybody would yesterday, but then we get inundated. So what are the key opportunities and challenges to delivering district heating and cooling with heat pump technology to meet Glasgow's energy needs? So just a few short bullet points would kind of help see the tone of the group. See what we've got going on. Okay, grid integration. Revenue gap, always good to see that one. I think we talked about grid and grid capacity a lot yesterday as well. Public engagement's interesting, and I think people are so used to how their energy and energy is delivered. We're working with Keepmoat Homes, the first house builder to connect to our district heating network, and it's been a long journey in terms of convincing them as well. Funding availability and anchor loads as well, and I think that's probably a soft point that the likes of some government and local authority can do in terms of being able to provide some minimum revenue streams or guarantees that I think may not necessarily be drawn upon. That compulsion for private buildings to connect, so we've talked a little bit about the being able to incentivise that. Aligning programmes and funding bids. Yeah, we were at an event the other week there where I think we were talking about levelling up funds and people saying, we don't want the public sector to become an industry of fund bid managers. We need people who are on the ground delivering. Retrofit, massive, massive challenge. High density housing is interesting. I think that speaks to our point about reuse of brownfield land, about building where the assets are. And utilise renewable heat sources. So we identified 20% at the moment in terms of renewable resources from Eugenia's presentation, and about the massive growth from there. An effective and efficient integration, I think that would be on that one that was scrolling down. Electricity pricing, yeah, if Dave Pearson from Star Energy was here today, he'd be speaking about that for sure, around that as well. Okay. A lot of this information is going to be available on our website, 5gdhc.eu, but we'll also have some other means by which to kind of broadcast what we've done today, so you'll be able to see some of this later on. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. That takes us through that. I'm absolutely delighted that's worked again. So you'll be pleased to hear that's me drawing things to a close, and you'll be able to enjoy the lunch. So what I do need to do is just go through a few thanks for the last 2 days' presentation. First of all, I'd like to kind of thank all of our partners and stakeholders. I'd like to mention in particular Scottish Enterprise, one of the owners of Clyde Gateway and a huge supporter of the work that we do, and also to the Scottish Government as well for the funding that they have provided and the support that they have provided to us through this process. Special mention as well to AMIDS. In terms of the support and the sharing of knowledge between us has been instrumental. I'd like to mention some of our partners involved in the EU project, so in particular to Vito, who were here yesterday, and Amelia, who was presenting and came over from Belgium, and to Eugenie today from Open University. It's been great to hear from you. In terms of other partners that we're working with directly, BGS, have spoken over both days and also helped host the visits to the site and speak a little bit more in detail about mine workings, and so very pleased that they've been able to participate in that way. And then to our partner Scottish Water Horizons, again, we're not just partners, we're business partners. We're a self-help support group, all of that type of stuff, and I'm delighted that again we've been able to share their experiences. And then also to our other funders at SSE who are contributing to the 5G DHC project, in particular what we call the capitalisation call, but that element around solar and solar PV. Final thanks then to everybody who's been helped everything tick over the last 2 days, to Urban Croft who've been filming the event, making us all look good. And then to Vinnie Teen, who've been providing the wonderful catering. They are on 18 Woodside Avenue in Rutherglen, so not from here. Get their opening hours on the internet, but I'd highly recommend you pay a visit. And then for me, my kind of personal thanks to Hugh in terms of pulling the agenda together and bringing all of the partners on board and helping work very hard on the content, and to Lisa, who's been instrumental in pulling all of the logistics together, all of the events together, without which we wouldn't have been able to make this happen. So thank you very much. We are now going to break for lunch, and then if anybody wants to participate in the tour, the intention is to take a short walk to the BGS site, which we would look at from the bicycle pump track, and then a further walk up to the Hope sculpture as well. So we can take a call on the weather, and if people are interested, we can let us know. But other than that, it's just for me to thank you and ask you to enjoy your lunch. Thank you.